welcome back to another video on my channel. Right now where I live, we are having a very bad snowstorm. It doesn't look that bad right now, but it's supposed to be really bad. And I just find something so comforting in filming these types of videos during thunderstorms, snowstorms, any kind of storm. I don't know why. I guess because it kind of reminds me of when you're a kid and it starts thunderstorming and then you get creeped out or you want to hear creepy stories. So it just kind of gives me that kind of vibe. So I thought, I'm not doing anything right now, so why don't I sit down and film the next video that I have planned for you guys. Today's video is another one that takes place in Canada, which is where I'm from. A lot of you already know that, but I usually don't film too many videos that take place out of Canada, but the last video that I posted also took place in Canada, and today's video takes place in the Northwest Territories. So with that all being said, let's get right into today's video. So today, like I mentioned, our story takes place in the Northwest Territories. Today we're going to be talking about the Nahanni Valley or Nahanni Valley. This is a very wide range of area, and it is full of dense forests, these really big jagged mountains, and it is said to be often full of this really mysterious and creepy mist. Something else to note is this area looks absolutely gorgeous, but the backstory that I'm about to share with you guys would surely deter anybody from going there. And because of these creepy and unsettling stories that I'm about to share with you guys, this area has gotten the name of the Valley of the Headless Men. Today, the Nahanni Valley is pretty much unbothered area, except for the fact that there are a couple homes out there. And back in the day, there were a few tribes that lived in this area, but it is a very difficult area to get to. You can hike, take a plane, or take a boat to get there, but none of these are excessively safe ways to travel, and you are pretty much risking your life going in there no matter which way of transport you take to get into this area, because the mountains, again, are very jagged and the weather is unpredictable, and it's just a very difficult place to get to, especially if you're hiking. But planes aren't that safe, boats aren't that safe. There's just no safe way to get in there, which is why this area is mostly untouched. Despite the difficult terrain and the fact that not very many people go there, this area is still included as a national park. But on top of all of that, another reason, like I mentioned before, why people don't really go to this area is because it is known as an extremely paranormal hotspot. Several native tribes have tried to settle in this area over the last 100 years, but all of them have pretty much completely fled the area. A lot of them saying that this is because the area is stalked by these unknown creatures. And several tribes have just completely vanished altogether from this area. See, this stuff is so crazy, and these kinds of cases really pull me in and just fascinate me. The valley gets its name from the Naha tribe, but this tribe hasn't been there since 1300 BC, because what is so strange about this tribe in particularly, like I mentioned, they vanished, leaving behind fires that were still burning and all of their belongings, but no one single person remained. And when you have all the paranormal stories that have happened in the area, this just continues to get stranger. In the early 1900s, reports started spreading all over Western Canada saying that there were very large gold deposits in the Nahanni Valley. And because of this, obviously, a lot of people started trying to travel to this area to see if they could obtain the gold themselves. In 1904, three brothers, Frank, Willie, and Charlie McLeod, decided that they were going to take this extensive trip through the Nahanni Valley to see if they could get their hands on some of this gold. So they were headed towards the gold mine that was supposed to be off of the Bennett Creek, which linked to the Flat Ridge River, which ran right through the middle of the Nahanni Valley. Sorry, I keep getting tongue-tied throughout this video. I don't know why, but just bear with me. Now, allegedly, while searching this area, the three men did find gold. But while they were headed back towards where they had came from, their boat capsized, and this pretty much made them lose everything, including the gold. However, they were able to save enough things that they could get back home. They arrived back in civilization. Frank and Willie couldn't stop talking about wanting to go back out and get the gold that they had initially set out to find. So they started to prepare and planned on going back out, but when they made this decision, Charlie decided that he was going to sit this one out. He kept thinking about how dangerous it was, that they'd gone out the first time and how the boat capsized and all of the things that could have gone wrong. So he decided to sit this one out while his two brothers headed back into the Nahanni Valley. So in 1905, that is what Willie and Frank did, accompanied by their friend Robert Weir. The three men headed back into the Nahanni Valley, and they wouldn't be expected back until the early times of the winter of 1905. But unfortunately, these three men would never make it back. However, it wasn't suspected that anything had happened to them when they didn't return back in the winter. I guess something that was pretty common back then that would never fly nowadays is if the weather got too bad, they were expected to just camp out there until the following spring. So people thought that that's what they were doing. They thought that the weather got too bad in the Nahanni Valley, and these three men just set up camp and decided to wait it out until the weather got better in the spring. But it was now 1907 and Charlie knew that something was wrong, so he gathered up a group of people to go out and search the Nahanni Valley in hopes of finding his two brothers and Robert Weir. So Charlie and this group of people went out to look for his brothers and Robert Weir in 1908. And that is just so crazy to me about this case. Like, these people had been missing for 3 years and nobody was able to get down there to search for them. And I know it was different times and these kinds of things were more normal back then, but it just seems so crazy to me. But anyways, once they got down there, Charlie roughly knew the path that they would be taking, or I guess like the route that they would be taking. So he was able to lead these people through the path or the trail trying to find his brothers. And eventually they came across an area that he had recognized from one of the letters that his brothers had written to him. They decided to search this area, and when they did, they found a sled that had carved in it, "We found a fine prospect." And Charlie recognized this handwriting immediately as belonging to one of his brothers. But besides the sled, there was no sign that anybody had been there at all, and there was definitely nobody there now, so Charlie got back in his boat and went down the trail a little bit more. Now they were going through an area that is known as Second Canyon, and this canyon is very strange in itself. Apparently there are these huge caves all over this canyon, and they are so high up that they've never been explored by humans ever. And because of how large these caves are, they're looming over the water, just making everything in that area extremely dark. So while they were going through this canyon, that is when they noticed these tents that were set up on the side of the water. So I guess like on some land on the side. And so they decided to pull their boats up and they went to investigate the area. They noticed pretty quickly while searching the area that there was a body laying outside of the tent, and when they approached this body, they realized that this body had no head. They walked around the back of the tent, and that is when they found a second headless body. These bodies were very badly decomposed, and when they left, there were 3 men, and obviously they all still had their heads. So they had to find, or they thought that they were going to find, the 2 heads of these bodies so that they could identify who these 2 men were. They didn't actually ever find the heads of these bodies, but because of the belongings that were found and the things that were on the bodies, they were able to identify these headless bodies as Willie and Frank, Charlie's brothers. Now, Robert Weir was never found, and he never was officially found, but there was reason to believe that he had also passed away because there were remains found a little bit ways up the water. Something to note here that I should have mentioned earlier, which I just realized I forgot, is that the first body that was found was posed as if it was reaching for a nearby rifle. Charlie obviously wanted some answers on what exactly had happened to his brothers and Robert, but he also did have some theories of his own. But anyways, when he got back to civilization, he reported their deaths to the Royal Mounted Police, and they had some very strange conclusions of how these men died. The official explanation of death for these men, who were missing their heads, were starvation, and they had explained these deaths away by natural causes. And this is very much reminding me of the Dyatlov Pass incident, because there is just no freaking way. But anyways, something else that I want to note here is in several articles that I read, but not all of them, a lot of these articles had stated that the men's heads were removed in a very, very unnatural way. Like, it was like almost like something had grabbed onto their heads and ripped them off their necks. It wasn't like somebody had decapitated them using a knife or some sharp object. It was as if something had physically yanked their heads off, but like in like a one pull rip, like not something that an animal could do. And I saw this and I think 2 articles, but it wasn't in all of them. So I just wanted to cross this piece of information with a set of caution, because obviously you need to take all of this with a grain of salt. At the time when the 3 men passed away, there were still some tribes trying to live down in this area. So Charlie thought that it was possible that the men had been attacked by one of these tribes. But again, authorities just completely dismissed this, saying that there was nothing to point in the direction that anything like that had taken place, and this was just a natural accident. And another thing to kind of back this up, although I don't believe that theory at all, is that it was reported that the men had only really good things to say about the tribes that they had met on their endeavors, and they only had really good encounters with all of the tribes in the area. But again, as strange as these deaths were, the government and authorities just dismiss this away as saying these people passed away by natural causes and there was nothing that they were going to do, and they weren't going to look into it any further. So there wasn't really much more that Charlie could have done, so this is just where this particular case stops. But that is definitely not where the strangeness of the Nahanni Valley stops. On September 28th, 1915, a man by the name of Martin Jorgensen was found also missing his head in the Nahanni Valley, just a little bit up the river from where Frank and Willie's bodies were found. Martin had set down into the Nahanni Valley and was planning on staying there for the whole winter until another group of men was coming out to meet him, and they were going to go look for gold. He had set up this like cabin area and was all set for the entire winter. But not only was Martin found like this, missing his head when these men came to meet him, but the cabin that he was staying in had also been completely burnt to the ground. There are several very confusing things that I would like to mention about Martin's death. First of all, despite the fact that he was missing his head, this case was never connected to the case of the McLeod brothers. On top of that, although Martin was found in this very strange situation, it is said that his body was buried and they had to dig it up, which suggests that something had buried his body. But this case also wasn't really looking into very deeply, and it was just kind of shoved to the side. And despite all of these people showing up without their heads and all of these horrible things happening in this area, this didn't deter people from going down there at all. People were determined to go down there, find gold, get rich, and they didn't really care about all of these stories that were coming out of the area. John O'Brien was another person who had set out looking for gold. He had set these traps in a separate area and was out with his partner looking for gold in, I guess, like a completely separate area of the Nahanni Valley. So he had told his partner at this point that he was going to separate from him to go check the original traps that he had set up to gather gold, and he would be back in a week. But when 2 weeks had passed and John never came back, his partner went out to look for him. He found John hunched over a burning fire, completely frozen stiff. And because of the weather and how John had passed away, this was chalked up to natural causes. John wasn't missing his head, so this is a little bit different than the last 2 cases that we talked about. But this is also strange. Like, how many people are going into this area and dying of natural causes? This is when people would finally start to take notice of all of the bodies that were turning up in the Nahanni Valley without any explanation of how the people had actually passed away. And so because of this, people started speculating that there was possibly a serial killer on the loose in the valley. Phil Powers had gone looking for gold in 1931, and his body would turn up in a burnt down cabin. Now, it isn't confirmed whether or not he had his head. However, it was said that while the cabin that he was in was burning down, he was sitting reading. How do you not know that the building that you're in is burning down to the point where like you don't even react? Like, his body was posed as if he was just sitting there reading, which is very odd to me. His death was also ruled an accident. In 1936, William Epler and Joseph Mulholland went out searching for gold, and when they didn't come back, a group of people went out searching for them, and this time they found a burnt down cabin, but they didn't find any bodies. These are just some of the very strange deaths that occurred in the Nahanni Valley. Several of these cases took place way back then, but a lot of them actually do take place much more recent, and there are just so many of them, and all of them are pretty much unexplained and leave people missing their heads and like all of these weird situations that you really just can't explain. Now, before I wrap up this video, there was one case that I want to share with you guys because of how strange it is, and then I think that I'm going to wrap it up. This case takes place a little bit more recent in 1926, but not that recent. And this case involves a woman by the name of Annie Lahardy. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And she went missing while camping in the Nahanni Valley with a hunting group. When the group went to bed that night, Annie was there, but when they woke up, she was gone. And nobody in the group had heard anything throughout the night. Annie wasn't acting strange. It was just very weird. And later on, a man would come forward saying that he had been camping in an area near where the hunting group was camping, but he was much more close to the water. And on that night when Annie went missing, he was woken up to the sound of somebody throwing rocks or rocks falling into the water. He said that this freaked him out a little bit, so he got up and he went to investigate the area to see what was going on, and that is when he saw a completely nude woman on all fours running up the side of the mountain. And the sound that he was hearing was her kicking rocks back that were falling into the water. And he got a good look at her because he said that she turned her head and made eye contact with him, and he said that she looked possessed, but the description that he gave was pretty much identical to what Annie had looked like. I would love to give you guys some answers on what exactly is going on in this area. However, there is no answers to be had. Some people think that there's a serial killer down in the valley. Some people think it's just paranormal activity. Some people think this is all just made up. Others think it could be a cryptid. There are just no solid answers, and none of them really cover all of the basis in my opinion. But I just think that these cases are so interesting, and I might even visit this topic again in the future. But guys, that is going to bring us to the end of today's video. If you like this video, please give it a big thumbs up. Don't forget to comment down below what you'd like to see in my future videos, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on that notification bell so that you don't miss any future videos from me. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.